The stat that I always share is 90% of data breaches come from suppliers. Like if you remember that large Target breach a couple years ago, that was an HVAC supplier of Target that leaked all this credit card data. And then you think, well, when did that company decide to do business with that supplier? And the answer is it was in the procurement process.
Hello, data nerds. My guest today is Rujul Zaparde. Rujul is the co-founder and CEO of Zip, a leading intake-to-pay procurement platform used by companies like Snowflake, Coinbase, and Canva. He previously co-founded FlightCar, which raised over $40 million and was acquired by Mercedes-Benz. Before starting Zip, Rujul was also a product manager at Airbnb and a visiting partner at Y Combinator. Rujul, welcome to World of DaaS.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Auren, for having me.
Now, what is like? Procurement is kind of like this weird thing. Like, what is it? Like, because like a startup doesn't have procurement per se. Like, do you need to have like 2,000 people before you have procurement?
Well, so I would say every organization in the world does procurement, whether it may or may not have a formal procurement
Just
function.
like put on your credit. I mean, obviously, like every family does procurement, right? We all buy stuff. Yeah.
Well, my wife is always telling me how we should have a Zip for home so she can approve my Amazon purchases before I make them. But yeah, exactly. Right. If you think about any business in the world, and how a company operates, right? This typically the second largest area of spend after payroll is it's procurement. It's how any employee at that organization actually buys the things that they need, whether it's the software, hiring contractors, or buying a billboard on the highway in order to do their jobs better and to help the company drive growth, drive savings, bottom line, et cetera.
But at some point, there is a department called procurement that shows up somewhere. Like where in a company's life cycle do we start to see that department show up?
Oh, yeah. We typically see that in the high hundreds of employees. So at least 500, 600, 700 employees. Once the company gets to that size, then they'll start to staff a procurement function. It's also interesting to see if you go to all the way to the other side, like some of the largest companies in the world, they'll have 2,000 or 3,000 people working in procurement. These can be very, very large functions in the large enterprise too.
And where does it often report into the CFO? Does it report into I don't know, the head of product? Because I assume procurement could also be like buying raw materials to go into your battery or something, right? It could be a lot of different. It could be like very strategic, or it could be less strategic.
No, that's a great point. And that'll typically fall under supply chain, which may be part of procurement or might be sort of forked.
Okay.
There's really two types of procurement. There's indirect procurement and there's direct procurement. Direct procurement is kind of like supply chain. It's buying all the things that you need to make the product that you literally sell to customers. And then indirect is all the software you buy and all the IT equipment and all that so that you can kind of
Got it. So when Apple is buying chips and glass for their phones, that's more supply chain. But when they're buying, airplane tickets and chairs and other types of things, that's procurement.
That's exactly right. That's indirect spend, which is sort of what we mean by procurement. Exactly. And you're right. Procurement typically reports into the CFO is what we find. Sometimes it'll be the CIO because it's so, procurement sits in between so many teams that have so many different systems that it becomes like a systems thing, not just a driving savings and tracking spend thing, which I can get into, but that's why sometimes it sits with the CIO, but probably 80% of the time, CFO.
When I talk to people who work at companies that have procurement, so these are large companies, I would say, by and large, all those people hate procurement. They hate the idea of it. They hate the department of it. They think it slows them down and makes them stop what they're doing. What do the companies who do procurement do well, and why do so many people hate it?
Yeah, I totally hear them too, right? And I think it's such a challenge because procurement is one just such an underappreciated or really unappreciated function in general. But I think it's also because the procurement organization is typically not set up for success because they're using these antiquated systems. Potentially, it's really hard to actually engage with the process the right way. And so when end users, right, I used to be product manager at Airbnb. When I had to go through procurement, it was super confusing for me to be like, oh my God, where do I go? What do I need to key in? And it's like, oh, what is a commodity code? I have no idea what that means because I'm just a product manager.
Yeah.
And so then, the function starts to get a bad rep, but it's not the fault of that function. It's just like it's just a byproduct of the software that they have and the fact that they sit in between all these teams and they're almost playing traffic cop, right? Because you've got to get legal to approve the contract. You've got to get risk involved. You've got to get budget. And so they're just sitting there. And so it may not be sitting with procurement, but it's sitting
But
with
what
somebody
is
else.
what's the goal? Like, why do you even have that function? Obviously, you want to spend money well. You want to like reduce the risks in companies. So you have, there's certain things you need legal to look over. You have I assume when you bought something as a product manager, you weren't trying to overspend. Like you're trying to use the company's money relatively well. Like why even have that function?
Well, that's a great question. There's two reasons. I think you touched on both of them. One is savings, and the other one is risk. From a savings perspective, right? We find like most employees, like when I worked at Airbnb, I didn't know what suppliers Airbnb already had. For example, if
Right.
I'm trying to buy something from, EY, maybe Airbnb already did business with, Deloitte, and there's a
Right.
negotiated rate, right? But I don't know that, and so it's procurement can help guide me. They can help negotiate because they're professional negotiators. They can
And they
draw.
can see just company wide what you're doing. And okay, if you want to get another seat of LinkedIn or something, they're like, well, we already have this many seats or something.
Exactly. I can get you hooked up with IT. Exactly.
Yeah.
And then the second component, though, is critically risk. The stat that I always share is 90% of data breaches come from suppliers. Like if you remember that large Target breach a couple years ago, that was an HVAC supplier of Target that leaked all this credit card data. And then you think, well, when did that company decide to do business with that supplier? And the answer is it was in the procurement process. And so if, the right checks and balances aren't sort of being met and the right reviews are not happening, and then there's a breach, well, you have to blame the process then, right? And so procurement is actually kind of, the sort of protecting the organization, making sure that the right checks and balances are followed, which, of course adds process, right? And can delay things.
I've dealt with dozens of procurement people in my life, and I have never once dealt with one that I thought was even remotely competent. Like, I just don't think like those people, even at a big company like Airbnb and Google, like are attracting the most talented people to go into that particular department. Am I completely off base? Would you disagree?
I would disagree. I think because I would say that it's just a very hard job to do, if you really think about the skill sets that are required. Because, for example, you have to be really good at driving savings, at negotiating, right? Like, which is a very specific type of probably more soft skill. But the way that the function is built today, you also have to be really good with systems and, at processing records across different systems, managing workflow. Like you have to be able to drive really good operational rigor. And at least with people I've worked with, like those are like different, like, someone who's really great at driving process may not be the best like person to like negotiate, and the inverse I think is often true. And so you just have like just so many different skill sets and flavors of skills that are required, that it's hard for someone to be really good at all of those things.
Just to push back, like if I go to Airbnb right now and just throw a dart at the engineering team, at the product team, at the sales team, like likely to get a pretty talented person, literally just by throwing darts there. Like I might bet my guess is most of the product managers are pretty good. There's some bad ones, but like most of them are pretty good. Most of the engineers are pretty good at Airbnb. There's just like, very, very talented people end up there. But if I throw a dart at the procurement team or the HR team, even at a great company like Airbnb, I'm somewhat skeptical that I'm going to get someone who's really talented. I'm sure there is somebody talented there somewhere, but I'm skeptical that they're getting like the most talented people. Like my guess is the most talented people go into product at Airbnb, or they go into design, or they go into engineering or something.
No, I hear what you're saying, but I would just say I think it's just different. Like they're just different skill sets, and they're different types of people that do the different types of, work in different functions in different roles, right? And so you can. It's hard to compare like a great HR person with a great engineer. Like they're just
Well,
going to
I
be
mean,
sort
I
of.
guess like for
But
any great employee, you want someone who's like who is proactive, who works hard, who's smart, who has agency. I mean, I would guess like those types of people go into product at a company like Airbnb. Like they're just super talented people, and they kind of go into that, and they're not going into like these kind of like side functions. But I don't know, I could be totally wrong. I just haven't met that many people there. So
No, totally. Well, what I would say is, there's a lot of like I've had the pleasure of meeting some really great procurement people over the last five
yeah,
years since we started Zip, and you realize that like it's less the case in the U.S., but in Europe there are universities that like I can get my degree in procurement in supply chain. That's less of a thing here in the States,
interesting.
but it's different, right, in other parts of the world. And if you think about like the procurement function at like I don't know, even if you pick like Airbus or something, or
Yeah,
Boeing, like those function, like like what those functions deliver, like literally moves the EBITDA number for these large organizations, and that is how they're valued. So like there is a very real, like it's a different skill. It's totally different than growth and R&D.
yeah.
But ultimately, most of the enterprises actually, they're kind of valued on their profitability, and procurement is a very, very core function to that. So it just, I hear you, because like I literally worked at Airbnb, and like,
Yeah.
companies, we focus so much on growth that we kind of like don't think so much about EBITDA and bottom line. But for most companies in the world, it actually matters a ton. And it's very, very critical. And people actually study this stuff, in other parts of the
Now,
world.
as companies get more visibility and control over their spending, like who are going to be like the winners and losers? Like if I'm going to invest, if I assume that this is going to happen, like how would you like allocate your dollars as an investor to winners and losers there?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think the winners are, well, I think the winners are certainly the leadership of the company, right? Because
Yeah,
they get earlier visibility into the spend. I also think the winners actually are like the employee base, right? Because I think there's totally a world where procurement can drive business velocity, and if it's an easier experience to follow, I actually get the thing I need faster in order to do my job better.
yeah.
Right? And so there's like a real element to that. I think the losers are, I don't like maybe some software that's been around since the 80s. Maybe it's kind of that flavor, and it's probably like I mean there is some semblance of more control, right? And so like completely moving faster and breaking things and not following process. Like I think if you're trying to do that, I think maybe then you come out a loser in that. But I don't know. I mean, I try not to think of the world.
Yeah, I mean, my guess is a lot of companies have like more Microsoft Office licenses than they have employees or something like that. Like there's probably like those types of things where like a company like Microsoft is going to get cut, or those, or they have a lot of Salesforce licenses, but they're just not using them in the right way, and they could those types of things.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I do think that like there's less waste, and so the companies that are benefiting from the waste end up sort of losing out. But I think that's just actually better for the world, and it's
Yeah,
better,
yeah, for sure.
you know. The other thing I'd say too is like I also think that this has become like procurement has become more front and center, certainly in the last couple of years, right, with the macro sort of environment. But also, if you look at the last like 100 years, like I'll give you an example, but like when Ford, I don't know if I actually learned this not too long ago, but when Ford was really growing, I can't remember which decade, but sometime in like the early to mid 1900s, they had this whole initiative to try to fully verticalize. And so they like wanted everything to be built in Michigan. They would like train everything over. They would they were like trying to get fully vertically integrated from the steel involved in the cars to everything. And ultimately that ended up just failing miserably. It like just totally did not work. And then you look at today, you look at a company like Tesla, for example, it's all supply chain and procurement. They're like just every single thing is coming from a different supplier. They're pulling it together, and that's how they drive cost savings and get the car to the consumer at the lowest rate. And so like, like as like even like how supply chains sort of evolve, like you sort of see the direct procurement component sort of change, and the value of procurement actually changes for organizations. And so there's like a macro trend there too. And so I think ultimately in all of that, you could argue that the consumer is actually the one.
Roll of DAS isn't just a podcast. Roll of DAS membership is a private
invite-only community for founders and executives of important data and AI businesses. It's a place for off-the-record, high-trust conversations focused on the biggest questions data leaders are facing. The community is about peer learning, curated intros, and access to private events. Everyone in the group is building or leading something meaningful in data. If that sounds like you, apply to join at worldofdaas.com. That's worldofdaas.com. Now, part of what you've been working on is just essentially agentizing things, right? If you just think of just general corporate workflows, what workflows do you think are going to be more likely to be agentized, and what do you think are going to take a longer time to be figured out?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that it's workflows that are sort of comprised of relatively repetitive, sort of predictable outcomes within the workflow, right? And procurement is a great example of that, because if someone's buying, software, they're going to go through certain types of legal reviews, IT reviews, budget reviews, right? But a budget review for any purchase is very similar to a budget review for another purchase, because it's what is it, what cost center, and
who has to look at it, what documents have to be reviewed, et cetera.
It's very sort of narrow. Each review is narrow in scope. And I think where LLMs are today, where sort of the capabilities exist today, I think you can actually handle narrowly scoped tasks really well with an agent. And that was part of, at Zip, we announced 50 plus pre-configured agents about 5 or 6 weeks ago that can be deployed into the procurement workflow. And so I think procurement's actually a great place to start, which I'm, by the way, personally excited about, because I feel like a lot of this type of innovation starts with the front of the house. It starts with revenue. It starts with, there's so many, I can't drive on the 101 without seeing AI BDR or SDR billboard ads.
Yeah.
Right. But people don't want to take much risk in accounting and in finance, because you can't get the numbers wrong, so to speak. And so generally there's more sort of aversion to risk, but procurement is a great place to start, because in the back of the house, because there are so many reviews happening that can be fairly repetitive.
Where do you think, where do you think agents are today, where they're not yet working, but we can be pretty confident in 1 to 2 years they're going to work?
Yeah, I can give you a couple examples. I think it's in certain types of legal reviews, because take a legal review, high stakes, but also high context, right? What types of risk are you willing to take? What does it mean to have a certain type of risk? And it's document based. LLMs are actually quite good at flagging discrepancies within documents, at sort of, hey, this is sort of non-standard to this company's internal policy, around indemnity caps. But how risky is that or not? You need a human to do that. And I think over even just the next 3 years, I think you'll see agents become really good at that, and humans, more importantly, trust agents to take more action sort of in the legal area. But I don't think we're there today. I think
there's certain things we probably could get there really quick. Historically, whenever I get an NDA, I sent it over to my, some lawyer at our company, general counsel, whoever, that they look at it super quick, and then they say it's okay to sign. But that could be a day later before I get that thumbs up, and it takes a lot of time. It's probably hundreds of dollars if you think of all of it, that went into it. And that just seems something where I could point it to my legal bot or something, and it could probably tell me, this is, based on what you've told me in the past, this is fine, nothing really to push back on or something.
No, you're totally right. It's a question of trust, which is really a question of stakes. And an NDA is low stakes, because it's just...
Yeah, good point. It's low stakes. Yeah. Every once in a while, there's a weird gotcha. So you just have to make sure, okay, it doesn't have these 6 crazy gotchas in there or something.
Exactly. But you're right. You start there. You don't start with the 49-page MSA.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, interesting. What where else are you where we're not quite there, but you're pretty excited about?
Well, what I'm actually really excited about. I'll give you a couple examples of agents that we recently announced and launched that customers are using. One we call the intake validation agent, which sounds like really not sexy, but what it is anytime someone puts in a request, right? Hey, I want to buy this thing. Typically, the first step is a triage step. Someone in procurement goes in, they check, oh, whoops, they selected the wrong category. It's actually this category. And by the way, that matters because it impacts how it hits the general ledger and the
Yeah,
P&L later, right? Or, oh, they said it's $100,000, but it's actually 100K per year for 3 years. So it's really 300K.
yeah.
We got to update that, right? And so our intake validation agent is configured to all of the company's policies, and it immediately detects all the discrepancies, and human can review it and say, yep, I agree, I agree, I agree. And it automatically updates the workflow. And like, humans are reviewing, tens of thousands of requests a year for a given customer potentially. So it can be really high throughput. But the thing that I think will get better over time is we still need to do a decent amount of configuration, right? A lot of this is like prompt engineering. We got to get the prompts right. We got to get the configuration right. Otherwise, it doesn't yield good result for the customer that's actually using it. And I think the configuration elements will get easier over time because right now there's still a decent amount of like implementation configuration work that's required. Like you can't just expect the agent to produce good result. You really have to explain to it what you want, and maybe that changes and gets better.
How are you using these tools internally, like for yourself, to write software better or do sales better, or how are you guys using maybe not the tools that you're developing, but tools that other companies have developed?
Yeah, so we use a tremendous number of tools internally. In engineering, of course, we use Cursor, probably
Right,
just
everyone does. Yep.
another tech company. Yeah, we use some of the prototyping tools, which I've had the pleasure of playing around with, like V0 and uh,
Yep.
super cool, and have really
Yeah,
helped.
like Bolt.new, Lovable, like all those guys. Yeah, great tools. Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know how enduring some of these things are because I every like other week that I ask, it's something new that we're using, and I don't know if
Yeah.
we are still using the old thing or we changed or
They're
what.
they're high velocity, high churn right now, right?
I would totally believe that. And then in other functions, we're using a bunch of tools to. I mean, you can imagine in VDR. We tried, by the way, some of the like AI VDR things, and those did not work for us. And maybe it's because we sell into the enterprise and
Yeah.
we just require a certain level of
I mean,
quality.
you would think they should, but like, is it so? Are you just working on things that like help you write more personal emails or respond to people quicker or sales engineering agents on the calls? Or I don't know. What do you?
No, that's right. It's like we basically realized that you can't have like an AI BDR with broad scope today, or at least not for our business. It
Yeah.
didn't work for us. We had to churn the solutions that we tried there. But if you narrow the scope, like okay, a salesperson like gets a summary, or like they're like look prospecting an account and they get all the information. They get a pre-written email that with what zip is and everything's ready to go for them. Make it easy, and then they can be like, oh, this email is terrible. Let me change it and then I'll send it out. That type of sort of experience has seemed to work well. And we use some like pretty small startups and things that we use to test. In sales, we're much more open to trying different things in sales. And we've also built our own, like we have our own prompts and ChatGPT that, our team has. They all have access and they can sort of put that in their own environment and tweak it. So we're pretty liberal in go to market. But just like the comment I was making, when it comes to anything to do with customers, anything to do with finance, accounting, our internals, we take much less risk there. And so there's definitely much, much, much less AI adoption in those
Are
areas.
you changing how you interview people?
That's a good question. I don't think we have, but we probably should. I think we probably should. And in fact, the real question is actually what happened. It's like the question before the interview, which is, do you really need this role?
Do you
And
really exactly? Yeah.
does the role change? Right? Does the role change?
Yeah.
Um, so that's a great point.
Yeah, because I imagine for certain roles, whether it be engineering or marketing, et cetera, like just if they're not using these tools, it's probably a good sign that they're not the right person for your company or something.
No, completely. I think there's an element of how much they're personally using AI, how sort of like technically forward they are, right? Not technical, but just they're like sort of with it more, because there's such a rate of change. You want people that are going to adapt and they're going to evolve and they're going to change how they work and get better, over the coming years.
Now, a couple of YC questions. Do you think the median YC startup today is better or worse than it was 5 or 10 years ago?
So my first company was in the winter 2013 batch, 12 and a half years ago, and then Zip was in the summer 2020 batch. So there's a 7-year delta for me
Yeah.
between the two batches. I would say that I think it's better, and I think it's because YC has just also gotten better over the years. Because really, if you think about the sort of the ethos of YC, the advice that YC gives, there's way more pattern recognition now in 2025 than there was in 2013, and it's simply because way more companies have gone through YC, way more founders have gone through YC, right? So you just learn more, the partners learn more, like the advice only sort of improves with time, and there's only more pattern recognition. And I also think there's better support systems post YC today as well, right? Because I remember back in 2013, YC there's demo day, it's awesome. If things work out, you get funded. If not, it's more challenging. And then after that, it's like okay, now here's the desert, and YC's over. So like you the hug that you got, like you don't get the hug anymore, and the world's tough. And I used to kind of joke, but it's kind of like you're shown the desert, you're given a bottle of Poland Spring, and you're wished the best. That's it. And most of you don't make it, kind of a thing. And today there's more support after from YC and from others in the community. And so I think it's different. It's like I feel like it's easier to do a startup today than it was, and I would credit a lot of that to YC.
Do you think the median Harvard student today is better also than it was 10 years ago?
Well, I dropped out, so I don't
Right.
know if I'm the right person to chime in there. But I don't know. Well, so see, I think there's also, even with YC, like there's a bit of a distinction in like has YC improved? Absolutely. Has the average founder improved? Again, I think so, because of the advice they receive, but there's a selection bias issue. Like I remember back in 2013, people that were doing startups, like it was still early days. Like it wasn't like it was getting to be cooler to be a founder, but it wasn't like that cool.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like today it's like more cool, which actually kind of is not a great thing, because it attracts people who are like trying to start something to be cool. And that's not why you should start something. Like you should start something because you want to build something.
Yeah. Or they want it on their resume, or, whatever. It's like you join McKinsey or something.
You cannot start a company to add something to your resume. That's like just the most, that really stings. So,
what is a common piece of advice like a YC advice that you might disagree with?
I mean, look, I went through YC twice. I worked at YC briefly as a visiting partner. I could not agree more deeply with like the advice that YC puts out there. So I really don't know. Like, I really don't know. I'm just such a firm believer in YC and the advice that it puts out there. Like, I have to really think.
Okay, because part of it is like, there's definitely like a go-to-market advice that's pretty common. There's certain things that are like, okay, we've already seen like 20 people try this company, so don't do this company type of thing, right? Which maybe is good advice.
Yeah, and it's possible that maybe YC was wrong the 21st time.
Right.
But do you want to be the founder that like has to find out,
Right, exactly.
And I think like YC's advice is also sort of Darwinian. It's like, look, here's the advice. We'll tell it to you straight. And if you want to ignore it, fine. Like, it's your company,
Yeah, totally.
But that's also, it's just so rare to get feedback like that, because, you talk to a VC, they don't want to invest. Let's say they're not going to tell you your idea is bad. Why would they? They would just be like, they'd say something polite and then move on. And then, but you are the one as the founder that ultimately pays that price. Not that you should listen to an investor. You should listen to your customer first and foremost. But if you're really early, you're still trying to figure out what sticks. And so There's just so much of the YC ethos that, we try to live by it at Zip too, right? I like another one is like, you've got to be really clear about what you do, and it should be really simple to explain.
Yes.
And you realize that so many people use so many fluffy words, and like you can't just
You
understand
go
what
to a
it is.
website of most software companies and you have no idea what they do. Yeah.
Exactly. And so we at Zip at least, and I personally try to live by more of that. So um,
Back to recruiting, are there any like philosophies you have that are a little bit against the grain, or are you looking for either on how you recruit or the types of people you recruit?
I think we really value. Again, I don't know how against the grain this is or isn't, but I personally really value scrappiness. And as a
How do you see that in the recruiting thing?
Yeah. So it's about like hearing the other person's story, right? And then like double clicking and like really it's all in the follow up and the follow up to the follow up kind of question of like how they actually.
And that's like a story of what they did in 8th grade. I mean, you're going into their life or something, or
No, just in their most recent job or their current job.
okay,
Or, by the way, like I also just asked, like, what's the scrappiest thing you've done in the last
okay,
12 years, 12 months, professionally?
yeah.
And it's
So
interesting.
hard. That's a hard question to answer.
Yeah, if you just flat out ask. And sometimes, you get great answers, and sometimes you get something that's like, I don't know, like, is that really scrappy? And, you're putting the person on the spot. You can ask a follow
Yeah,
up, you can really push, but you kind of like understand how they think and like how they like actually do work, because as dumb as it sounds, it's really important to hire people who can actually do work.
yeah, yeah. How else can you determine if they can actually do work before you hire them?
So I think it's tough. The thing that I feel like I've found to be the most valuable is honestly doing enough back channeling and reference checking.
Yeah,
And I'd strongly recommend, of course, doing like a working session with a person, getting into a complicated prompt and having them dedicate some hours, and you kind of go through it together live. So that definitely helps. But I wouldn't say like it doesn't give you perfect signal. I don't think like there's definitely false positives that you get. Or rather false negatives. So, back
a
channel.
couple personal questions. What is a conspiracy theory that you believe?
Oh, I don't know. There's a conspiracy theory that I believe. I mean, I don't know if I believe any of this stuff or not, but there's certainly a lot of, conspiracy theories that float around about how COVID got started and
Yeah,
whether it's, truly an organic thing that happened or not quite so much. In Wuhan or whatever. And again, I don't necessarily believe one way or another, nor do I really care that much. But I'm not convinced one way or another just yet. So maybe I'll bring that one up.
all right, that's good. All right, last question we ask all of our guests: what conventional wisdom or advice do you think is generally bad advice?
So I think Paul Graham, PG, actually wrote an essay on how all traditional management advice is actually wrong for founders. And
What's some
I
examples there? Or yeah,
I have plenty. The classic, right? Like you're a manager. Like what's that book? It's like the 1 Minute Manager. Have you read? It's like literally like a 20 page.
I've heard of it, but I've never read it. Yeah.
Well, it takes like 5 minutes to read it, or 10
Okay.
minutes maybe,
Okay.
something
Maybe
like
I
that.
should read it then. Yeah.
It's not really worth reading, but
Okay.
it's like it talks about this manager who like starts in one job, he gets promoted, and then it kind of ends with something like, and I read this years ago, so I could be misremembering, but it kind of ends with like, and then the manager is like looking out the window, sort of like doing nothing because he has delegated his work and his teams are doing it, and he has become a manager or something like that.
Uh-huh.
And you think, why would that be good advice? And I think the point that PG made was that management advice is written for companies that with CEOs who are not founders, with hired CEOs, right? Like you're hired to be the CEO of like a
Yeah.
company that makes blenders, and now now you run a company that makes like toaster ovens. Like you don't know anything about the product. It's like a management thing. You probably run the company
Yeah.
the same way. You maybe don't care that much about the product and where the company's headed. And so you run the company in a certain way, but you don't do that as a founder. And I think, in 20 or 30 years, and this is the point he was making, you'll have like management advice might be like the opposite, because you'll have more big companies that are founder CEO sort of led companies. And the prevailing advice will be like literally the complete opposite of the advice from,
Even when they're not founder CEOs, you would ideally the CEO should have like a deep interest in the products and be creating the products. And the if you're the CEO of Walmart today, like you're probably like really going to the stores and trying to understand like how the stores are going. If you're the CEO of Starbucks, you're probably like tasting the coffee and seeing, if you're the CEO of Microsoft, like hopefully you're like a software developer, you understand what's going on. Like my guess is that even those types of CEOs are not like the older school CEOs, but I don't know actually. I don't. Yeah.
I don't know either. And I think maybe it has gotten better. Maybe it has changed. But I think a lot of the sort of management advice out there, I think lacks like 2 or 3 decades probably, right? Because it gets into books. It like takes decades to sort of cycle through a change.
It is interesting how like, there was a time where so many engineering managers weren't really in the code. And many of the managers turned out to be not the best software developers. They were just kind of like, they were good at people, or they're good at advocating for their teams, or, other types, or they're good at dealing. And it does seem like there's been a shift there where even at bigger companies, like they're just like much more in the code now.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that's totally net positive for the world. And so I do think that sort of the prevailing advice would change here pretty significantly, but I think it'll be like a total night and day from conventional wisdom and sort of advice around management.
What you're talking about is kind of this like founder mode meme in a way, right? Like you got to get in the details more. Yeah,
and it's that's why I think it's founder mode and not CEO mode or whatever.
Yeah. You have to care deeply about it. That's out there. All right, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for joining us on World of DaaS. I follow you on LinkedIn. You're not on X, by the way. You're like,
I'm not.
Sorry.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not. I'm not very much on X, but
I follow you on LinkedIn. I definitely encourage our listeners to engage with you there. This has been a ton of fun.
No, thanks so much for having me, Auren.
Thanks for listening. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to World of DaaS wherever you consume your podcasts, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and more. And please help us get discovered by leaving a review. And check out worldofdaas.com. That's worldofdaas.com. And of course, connect with me on Twitter @Auren. That's AUREN. Would absolutely love to hear from you.